Ishlach Ezef HaMikodesh, and the Tzir Yisrael Be'ekel. Yisrael Kodesh Chesecha, Ve'loskot Yidash Nesela, Yitem Lechochel B'Gachol V'Chalatzoscha V'Mali, Ranu Rabbi Shuasecha, V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgeu, Yimali Adonai Kol Mishal Yisecha, Ati Yadaiti Ki Yeshia Adonai Meshichem, Ya'anehu Mishmei Kodshet, V'Guris Yesha Yeminim, Eile V'Rechev, V'Eile V'Susim, V'Nachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkeh, Ema Korban Apollo, V'Nachnu Kamen V'Naseda, Adonai Heshia Melech Yaneinu V'Yem Karenu. Before we go to Basi Legani, I wanted to just say a few words about today's day. So today is a very big day in the Hasidic calendar, today and tomorrow. In fact, tomorrow, Rabbi Patil will have both classes together, and we'll go more into it. But both days are connected to the Mitteler Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad. The name was Duber. And today was the day that he was born, Kislev. And today is also the same day that he was nostalgic. And the tonight, which is Yud Kislev, tomorrow, this is the day that he was released from jail. Just like the Alter Rebbe was arrested by his opponents, that they filed false accusations against him. Same as with the Mitteler Rebbe. He was arrested. It was also the same time of the year. It's interesting. The Alter Rebbe was arrested 2 times, and both times it was right after Simchas Torah. The Mitteler Rebbe was arrested also right after Simchas Torah. But he went out of jail on Yud Kislev. So it's a Chag HaGeula. And and the reason why this day, Yud Kislev, it's a Yom Tov and Chassidim celebrate, but nowhere close to the big celebration of Yud Kislev. And one of the reasons for that is because the first year after he was released from jail, when the Chassidim were preparing to make a big celebration, that first year, a day before the celebration, Mitteler Rebbe was nostalgic. So it never took off the ground as a huge celebration, and that's the reason why it's not the same level like Yud Kislev. Just a few pointers about the Mitteler Rebbe. Mitteler Rebbe is not buried next to his father, and the reason for that is because he passed away. He was nostalgic on the road. He was on the way back home from visiting the Alter Rebbe's oil. Alter Rebbe's oil is in a place called Hadich, and he was on his way home, and that's where he became sick in a certain city called Nezhin. And after that, and when he passed away, so he was buried over there. In Derech HaTeva, what led to his illness? He was very young. He was 54 years old. That was the time when the Tsar made a new decree. The Tsar at that time in Russia was a big anti-Semite. Always looked for different ways to persecute Jews. And he made a horrible decree that was officially camouflaged, that in order to have a good army, you need to train children from a very young age, 7, 8 years old. So therefore, the army was taking children 7, 8 years old away from their parents and start training them in the army. That's what was the official reason. The unofficial reason was to get Jewish children and to force them to convert to Christianity. So the Mitteler Rebbe traveled to the Ohel of the Alter Rebbe because he knew this decree was coming, to plead that it shouldn't happen. Apparently, it did happen. But he said the Mitteler Rebbe was so overcome with pain and grief from this Gezerah, and that's what led to his nostalgia. That's what led to his passing. There's a lot of things to say about the Mitteler Rebbe, and I asked Mrs. Yaffe, she'll be printing up a little booklet which we made with some details. I want to put out one detail, and tomorrow Rabbi Palti will talk about more. When the Mitteler Rebbe was installed, when the Alter Rebbe was installed, and the Mitteler Rebbe had to become the new Rebbe. By the way, anyone know why he was called the Mitteler Rebbe? So every Rebbe is in the middle between two Rebbes. But what? The first three. I always thought so. And one day I saw an explanation that explained it a little bit better. The Mitteler Rebbe was a Rebbe for a very short time because he became sick and he passed away at a very young age. I think he was a Rebbe altogether for 17 years. So there were a lot of Chassidim that they knew the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe, and then the third Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe in Yiddish, Alter means old. But in this case, it means like we say Friedrich Rebbe means the previous Rebbe. That's what Alter Rebbe means. So they couldn't say the same thing about the Mitteler Rebbe once he was in the Tzaddik, because they're already using this term for the first Rebbe. And the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Rebbe, the third Rebbe, he was the Rebbe. So the Mitteler Rebbe was called the Middle Rebbe. That's how they called it. That's how he got the name. But when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, in those days, the opposition against Chassidus was very, very severe, very, very strong. And they were fighting very aggressively. And that's why they arrested the Alter Rebbe once and twice, and see the arrested the Mitteler Rebbe. But it wasn't just like there are people that are against Chassidus. It was an organized crime. They literally had meetings, and it was organized what the strategy we should use to fight the Chassidim. So when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, they said the Alter Rebbe was a very dynamic leader, and the Mitteler Rebbe was known more as a quieter, softer person. So they felt that if that's the case, now is the time, after the Stalkos, to launch a very, very aggressive campaign against the Chassidim. And if we do it now, we can break them. Because the Mitteler Rebbe doesn't have the same power of leadership as the Alter Rebbe. That's what they thought. The Mitteler Rebbe was aware of this, so he told his Chassidim two things that everyone has to follow. One thing was that the Chassidim should not engage in any kind of debates with the opponents, because they're really not interested in debating. They're just interested in basically bashing and destroying, Chassidus. And therefore, he even said to them that they're not allowed to go into daven in the shul where the opponents are, because they're just going to get into arguments and fights, and it's not going to accomplish anything. And in fact, their intention is to weaken Chassidim. One Chassid said that for 5 years he couldn't daven with her in the shul, because the only shul in his town was the other shul, and Mitteler Rebbe said not to go there. The second thing he instituted was that every chassid who comes to Lubavitch and he hears a mimer from the Mitteler Rebbe, on his way home, whichever city he passes, he should stop and publicly review what he heard in Lubavitch. In other words, to give over Chassidus in public. And in fact, there's two stories from those days that I heard. One, and both of them, one story that I ever repeated more often, and that is, it was one chassid who was extremely, extremely articulate, spoke beautiful. He had a deep understanding of Chassidus, and wherever he came and he gave over words of Chassidus, people were so inspired they became Chassidim. So he came to the Mitteler Rebbe one day, and he said, "I want to stop doing this." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's feeding my ego. Every time I go, I'm very successful, and people, are licking their fingers from the chassidim that I give them, and they're becoming chassidim. But at the same time, I'm becoming more of a yesh. I'm becoming more of my ego is being inflated." So the Mitteler Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, which means even if you turn into an onion, go out there and have the chassidus. In other words, you personally, your spirituality seems to be at risk, but in the meantime, you're inspiring tens and hundreds of people, so go ahead and do it. And the Rebbe used these words many different ways, but generally the idea of shlichus. The second thing was a story that there was a chassid Rabbi Yitzchak Moshe of Yassi. Yassi is a city in Romania. And this chassid came to Lubavitch, where the Mitteler Rebbe was. He traveled home, and on the way home, he stopped off in a shul to give over Hasidus. What he didn't realize was that this shul belonged to a big Hasidic Rebbe. Not just a Hasidic Rebbe, one of the older students of the Maggid of Mizrich. His name was the Abtarov. And as you probably know, that the other Hasidic Rebbes, students of the Maggid, did not agree with the Alter Rebbe to spread so much Hasidus. They said, you're not supposed to, learning Hasidus in depth, that's only for a Rebbe. Hasidim, they have to just get a little bit of Hasidus on the tip of their fingers and not to learn it in depth. Here comes a Hasid, goes into another Rebbe's shul, in his shul, and he gets up there and he starts giving over Hasidus Chabad. In the middle of him doing this, the Rebbe walked in. And when he saw that, he was very upset. Big tzaddikim, they don't get upset because of egoistic reasons. He got upset because his shlichus is to teach people to serve Hashem one way. And here's a person coming into his domain, and he's teaching people to do it a different way. So it's an act of rebellion. The Gemara says that man malka rabbanon, that every big tzaddik or sage in his community is like a melech. This is an act of rebellion against the melech. So he cursed him and he said, you shouldn't live till the end of the year. He was shocked. He didn't know that this was this big tzaddik. So what did he do? Instead of going home, he went right back to the Mitteler Rebbe and he told him the story. And I guess he wanted the Mitteler Rebbe to cancel this person's curse. I know it sounds strange. Why would he curse him like that? The only way I can understand it is, like I said, is my understanding, that he was like a king. And in his domain, it was like rebellion against the king. And that's what happens when a person rebels against the king. That's the punishment. So the Mitteler Rebbe said to him, did anything else happen? Were you respectful? Did you say anything else disrespectful? No. I just gave over the mimer and had no idea. So the Mitteler Rebbe leaned on his forehead for a moment. And then he said, you'll outlive him. So he said, Rebbe, he's an older person. I need a better bracha than that. The Mitteler Rebbe leaned on his forehead. And he said, you'll outlive his children. So he said, Rebbe, his children are also older people already. I need a better bracha than that. And he said, you'll outlive his grandchildren. So this chassid actually lived to the age of 104. And until the day that he passed away, he was full, clear mind, just like in his younger years. So the Mitteler Rebbe writes, good morning. Their plan was to launch this aggressive attack and through doing that to, in a way, crush the Hasidic movement as a result of what the Mitteler Rebbe did. First of all, he didn't allow them to become victims of these attacks by not allowing them to engage in arguments. Second of all, he brought Hasidus to be publicized because every single Hasid had to stop off in any shul and give over Hasidus. So the first year that he became a Hasid, first year that the Mitteler Rebbe became a Rebbe, 15,000 people became Hasidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. 15,000 Hasidim that first year with all this nagus. Another thing interesting to note is the Mitteler Rebbe is the first one that moved into the city of Lubavitch. The Alter Rebbe did not live in the city of Lubavitch. He lived in a city called Lozhna. And then after there was a war between Napoleon and France, and it was after the Alter Rebbe was arrested the second time, in the whole issue, and he moved away from Lozhna and he went to a city called Ladi, but not Lubavitch. But after there was a war, the Russian-French war, and the city where the Alter Rebbe lived, everything was burnt down. So the Mitteler Rebbe looked for a new place. And he said the Alter Rebbe came to him and told him that he should move into the city of Lubavitch. And the Alter Rebbe, with a young child, or young bacher, he learned in Lubavitch with someone called Rabbi Yisachar Ber, who was a follower of the Baal Shem Tov. And he told him exact location where that house was. It was 58 years earlier. And he said, that's where you should build a shul, and that's where you should set up Lubavitch. So this became the Lubavitch Center for 102 years. In Lubavitch was the Mitteler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, and the Friedrich Rebbe was already, he was Rebbe, he lived in Lubavitch, he was born in Lubavitch, lived there, but as a Rebbe, was already outside of Lubavitch, was already in Rostov, it was sitting. The Mitteler Rebbe also was known for his passion for Chassidus. Apparently, it was in a way that we didn't find it by any other Rebbe, to the extent that the Tzemach Tzedek was his son-in-law. It was his nephew and son-in-law. Tzemach Tzedek married his daughter. Tzemach Tzedek and his wife were first cousins. So Tzemach Tzedek said that my father-in-law's passion for Chassidus, this was his very life, that if you would cut his finger, you wouldn't see blood flowing, you would see Chassidus flowing out of his finger. Because that was his physical life. And it's known that if one time there was a situation where he couldn't hear Chassidus, he became physically sick. This was his whole life, to the extent that when he was arrested, he had a doctor that came to the government and testified that just like every person who's in jail needs food and needs drinks and needs to be taken care of medically, he needs that as well, but he also needs Chassidus. Without that, he can't live. So you must provide him an opportunity. So while he was in jail, they allowed 3 times a week Hasidim to come in, and he should say a Maimon Chassidus. Because that was the doctor testified that that's his life. When he passed away on this day, there was a certain point where he looked like he was just totally unconscious. And they thought that he was already passed. And everybody room began to cry and scream, the Rebbe's gone, Mitteler Rebbe's gone. The doctor said no. Then one doctor said to another doctor, you want to see something? Just tell him that we're permitting him to say Chassidus, and you'll see he'll wake up. So they told him that they're permitting him to say Chassidus. He opened his eyes, he sat up, he has to bring his Shabbos clothing, and he said a mimer. But he kept asking, is it dawn yet? Is it the break of dawn? It was at night. And then at a certain point in the mimer, the last word that came out of his mouth was the word Chaim. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, we find the same thing by the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, that also he was saying, revealing Kabbalah, and the last word that came out of his mouth was also the word Chaim. And that's why, if you know, a lot of the Svarim of the Mitteler Rebbe are called with Chaim, Torah's Chaim, Ambratius, Torah's Chaim, Shmais, and so on. Okay, this is a little bit about the Mitteler Rebbe. You can see more in that booklet. And tomorrow, Rabbi Paltiel will fill you in more depth to all these things. And we will now continue in Basi Legani. So here you have, you can each take this. This is the references to the mimer.
Majeski, the first day I ever came to school, Rabbi Majeski spoke about the Mitteler Rebbe.
What?
My first time I ever came to school, my first day.
Really?
Rabbi Majeski spoke about the Mitteler Rebbe. It was about this time.
Oh, so today's your Yada's birthday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think my birthday was your birthday.
My birthday.
I was like, why is everyone celebrating so much? That's a big deal.
Oh, there's cakes.
The cake.
And the cupcakes. And that's why you stayed. Good cake. Okay. So we're in the middle of, we're learning Basi Legani Tafshin Yud. Basi Legani of the Friedrich Rebbe. And we're in the Ois Beis, in the second chapter, where he's talking about the union of a carbon. And he explained that the carbon is, the gashmis is what it is. You take an animal, you slaughter it, you put the meat on the mizbeach. But meruchni is, it means to bring closer. The word carbon comes from the Lashon Kiruv, closeness. Is to bring my Nefesh Bahamis closer to Hashem. And all the details that we find in the Torah about the physical animal and the process of sacrificing a physical animal, there's a parallel to that in how we work with our spiritual animal. So, for example, one example was that regarding to the physical animal, it says that not every carbon is the same. Some is cattle, some is sheep, some is goats. It means that Baruchnis, every person has a different kind of an animal soul, and you have to deal with it differently. It could be an ox, it could be a sheep, and that's a general category, and there are more specific categories. Then he goes into another point, that when the physical animal was brought into the Mizbeach, there were two fires. One fire that came from Shemayim, and one fire that we had to light ourselves. Every morning we had to light a fire. That was one of the first things they did in the Beis Hamikdash. So now he goes into explaining what does that mean spiritually. And he started to explain that the Nefesh Elokis has a fire meaning a fire of love, a fire. The Nefesh Elokis is on fire with love for Hashem, but that fire is not a fire that we create, that's given to us from Shemayim. So let's start with that part, and that's on page 40. Page 40. Just like in regards to the physical carbon, there were the two fires, a fire that came from above and a fire that we had to light. So too, in the Aveda B'Nefesh Adam, when we talk about us serving Hashem, internally there's also the two fires. Yesh Eish Shalamayla, which is what? Arish Be'Eish B'Nefesh Elokis. The fire of love of the Nefesh Elokis, or Kamayma, like it says in Shir HaShirim, Yishafel Rish Be'Eish Shalheves Yudke. Our sparks are sparks of fire, the flame of Hashem. What does that mean? It means the Nefesh Elokis is a fire and a flame of love for Hashem. It's brought down in the Medrash Rabbah, Ke'esh Shalamayla, that when it says a Shafel Rish Be'esh, it's not an ordinary fire, it's a heavenly fire, a spiritual fire, which is what? She'eina Eish Mechabel Mayim Ve'eina Mayim Mechabel Eish. The spiritual fire is different than the physical fire. The fire can't cause that the water should be consumed. I guess a fire cooks water long enough, there's no water left. And the water won't extinguish the fire. In other words, it's fire and it's water, but they're spiritual fire and water, so they don't have the same limitations as the physical fire and water. This fire and water can be together. The natural Nefesh Elokis, the nature of the Nefesh Elokis is that it has this burning love and fire for Hashem, so this fire is like the Eish Shalamayla, that water cannot extinguish it. What's the water? The Mayim, maybe you learned about this in the Sikha, with the flood, with Noach. Over there it also explains that the flood and the great waters alludes to all the worries and all the thoughts in a person's mind that are racing constantly about his Gashmizik things. All sorts of bilbulim, shainim, thoughts that are disturbing, things that are disrupting and distracting. And they don't let a person concentrate on Torah and Aveda. Even the rivers, which are very powerful and have a very strong current, and nevertheless, they won't be able to wash away this fiery love. And the reason is because this love is like Eish Shalamayla. It's a spiritual love. It's a godly love. And this godly love, water can't extinguish. There's a story in Tanakh, famous story with Eliyahu Navi, that there was a time where the Avodah Zarah called Baal. There was an Avodah Zarah called Baal, and everybody, all the Yidden, unfortunately, a lot of Yidden, most of the Yidden, unfortunately, fell for it, and they were worshiping this Avodah Zarah. And there were those individuals who were considered themselves prophets. They were giving over prophecies in the name of this Avodah Zarah. And the king at the time was his name was Achav. He was part of this whole movement. In fact, they killed a lot of the Nevi'im that were true Nevi'im, and there were hundreds of false prophets. Eliyahu Navi at that time was still, before he went up to Shemaim, he was a regular person, and he was in hiding. And then he was given a message by Hashem. He should go out there and he should demonstrate to the Yidden and teach them what the real truth is. So he offered Achov that will have a what do they call it? An open it's disturbances, but it's also fire. So the throat is dried up. Okay. Last week was talked about Choron. So in the Maimorim of Chassidus, on that parsha, it says Choron is related to a pasuk where it says, Hashem says, Nichar Goreini. Goren means the throat. My throat I have a sore throat, a dry throat. So the Maimorim talk about the dry throat means there's too much, that when a person speaks, there's supposed to be fire, there's water, there's air, there's more fire than that, everything dries up. So we gotta straighten it out over here now. The story what happened was that he said to them, we're gonna do this, we'll have a confrontation, open confrontation. He went up on a mountain called Har Carmel, and he said, I'll set up a Mizbeach, and you guys set up a Mizbeach, and both of us will make a Mizbeach without a fire. And I'll pray to Hashem, and you pray to your gods, and we'll see who can perform the miracle that the fire will appear miraculously. So that's what happened. They went first. They set up a Mizbeach, and they prayed that fire should come down. What were they thinking? They knew that they and their God, it's all Baba Mises, it's all false. So what were they thinking? So the Gemara says that they actually arranged for two people to be hiding underneath the Mizbeach. And then when they'll be praying for fire, from underneath, they'll make the fire go up, and people will look and they'll see that fire appeared miraculously. The Eibishter sent a snake, poisonous snake, and killed them both. So they were praying and they were dancing and they were doing all sorts of things, and no fire came. It's interesting how Eliyahu Navi says, maybe your God is sleeping, screaming a little bit louder, make more noise. He's making fun of them. And then he said, and now we'll do our part. So not only that there was no fire, he said, I'm going to put water on the Mizbeach, the opposite of fire. Then he davened. In fact, he davened Mincha. And the Gemara says, from this we learn that Mincha is the most precious of all the prayers, because he was answered only in the schus of Mincha. He davened for fire, and the fire came down miraculously. And the fire not only came down, but it consumed the water, which is the opposite of nature, another miracle. And all the Yidden saw it, and they shouted Hashem Ulakim, and they did tshuva. But normally, fire and water are two opposites. So what we're saying is the fire of the Nefesh Elokis, which is a fire of passion and love for Hashem, the water can't extinguish it. It means all the disturbances of the world cannot extinguish this fire. Again, it could become hidden, it could become more concealed, but it can never be extinguished. Yep.
Did Hashem accept their tshuva after going to such lengths?
Yep. That's when they shouted, Hashem Hu Elokim. We say this on Yom Kippur 7 times. They shouted 2 times, but that's the source of Hashem Hu Elokim. And this is what each person has their own personal nefesh bahamis has to have, just like begashmis. The meat on the mizbech gets consumed by the heavenly fire. Same with our nefesh bahamis has to be consumed by our godly fire, by the fire of the nefesh elokis, which means shegam hu yiloi avol. It's not enough that the nefesh elokis is on fire with love for Hashem. What we need to accomplish is that the nefesh bahamis should be on fire. In other words, begashmi is when you bring a carbon, the meat is on fire; it's burning. So beruchnis means that nefesh bahamis should be on fire. And which fire? The fire of the nefesh elokis. As it's written in the Shema, "V'havtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha." Really, it should have said b'chol libcha, one base. The Gemara asks, why does it say two of them? To teach us b'shnei yitzrecha, with both of your yetzer, the yetzer tov and the yetzer hara, which means the gam nefesh bahamis yilei avol lekus, that I have to see to it that my nefesh bahamis should have love for Hashem. Question is, what does that mean? If a person is davening, and the davening gets them excited, and as a result of that excitement, they feel they're having love for Hashem, how do I know if it's my nefesh elokis, or I'm also getting my nefesh bahamis on fire? Apparently, there's two possibilities. One possibility is nefesh elokis is on fire, and because it's on fire, the nefesh bahamis won't interfere. The other possibility is that my nefesh elokis is so much on fire, it gets my nefesh bahamis to be on fire. So if a person is davening, and the nefesh bahamis is on fire, and they are on fire, how do I know who's on fire? Is it my nefesh elokis, and the nefesh bahamis is just sort of overwhelmed by it, or my nefesh bahamis itself is also on fire? How can I know such a thing? So that's what he's going to explain in the next piece. How does this happen? That nefesh bahamis also is on fire, and they slapshus and nefesh bahamis. This can only be if the nefesh elokis encloses itself into the nefesh bahamis. What does that mean? It means like this: that let me first explain, then we'll do the words inside. Naturally, a nefesh bahamis does not get excited about godliness. Nefesh bahamis, by the way, we say we have an animal inside. Some people might hear those words and get very upset. It's very offensive. You're telling me I have an animal inside. When we say animal, we don't mean something vicious or something violent. An animal in Tanya, when it says nefesh bahamis, means it's the natural, it has another name called the natural soul. It's a soul in me that wants to just live, be happy, have pleasure. Nothing, it's not the desire for evil, the desire for anything vicious or malicious. It's just a desire for pleasure. That's really the essence of Shabbat. For example, a behemoth, a cow. Cow is not a predator, has no desire to kill. It just wants to do things that give it pleasure. Whether it's eating, whether it's sleeping, whether it's drinking, whether it's playing with another animal, but it's just all about pleasure. But in Chassidus, this kind of life is called klipa because it's not godly. Klipa's no God, but it's not godly. So the nefesh bahamis, beteva, naturally does not get excited about Hashem. In order to get the nefesh bahamis excited about Hashem, I have to speak to myself in such a language that the animal part in me can relate to it and get excited. And as a result of that, that part of me will get excited. I mean, to give an example, let's say you're doing mivtzorim. If I'm doing mivtzorim, I meet someone in the street that would like to put on tefillin. What's tefillin? I say, it's tefillin, yimamshir chochmah bina vatzilus into bria. But it doesn't just stop there. From bria, it goes down to asiyah. You think we'll put on tefillin?
No.
I don't know what put on tefillin. You know what I'm talking about. Let's have a nice day. He's a nice guy. And enjoy the rest of the day. Not because he's against what I said. Said he's not against what I said. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. As far as he's concerned, I'm talking Chinese. What if I talk to him and I say to him that the Jewish people in Israel now are going through a very hard time? One of the commandments are tefillin, and our rabbis tell us that when you put on tefillin, it gives long life to soldiers, it protects them, it helps them be successful in defeating the enemy. Okay, already. What's the difference? Because the second thing he could relate to. When you say the second thing, is that his nefesh alikis or his nefesh bahamas?
Right.
What? I mean, it's sort of the natural part of me that if I understand, it has to be the nefesh alikis also, because to believe that putting on tefillin makes any difference in Eretz Yisrael it comes from a nefesh alikis. But what's motivating me is the understanding that I will bring long life to the soldiers, and I hope save those people in Israel. I'll get the hostages out, and that's even my nefesh Bahamas could relate to that, appreciate that, and therefore, if I'm motivated to do it, I can clearly say that's my nefesh Bahamas. So when it comes to davening and meditating on Hashem's greatness, there's many different things you can think about, but what he's saying here is the nefesh Elkis has to invest itself in the nefesh Bahamas, which means very similar to what I just said. But I'm talking about two people, and this is the two parts within me. So just like with two people, if you want to inspire that person, you have to think where they're coming from, what they could relate to, what they appreciate. Like, for example, there are many Jews who were once not religious, now they are religious, and they're professional people. They're doctors, lawyers, mathematicians, professors in one area, another area. And now when this person meets somebody, for example, in the same field, a scientist, and he explains to the other person something from the realm of science to inspire him to believe in Hashem, it's a whole different kind of conversation because he's speaking his language. And if he's talking to a mathematician and he's able to bring out belief in Hashem through something in math, he'll be more inspired because it's his language. This is what he's passionate about. He understands it. He can relate to it. And you're showing him something based on math that it has to be such and such a thing. Or like the book that I told you, that from a point of view of physics, he shows that you have to believe in Hashem. When you show that to a person who's into physics, he'll be more inspired than if you give some other speech. So that's called investing yourself in the Nefesh Bahamas. I have to speak to myself and think. So, for example, if I think about Atzilus and Himself and all these things, it's very deep thoughts, but that doesn't inspire my Nefesh Bahamas. If I think about Hashgacha Pratis, and I say, pay attention to what happened yesterday. You walked out, and that person walked in, and you just happened to meet him, and that happened to happen just the right time, and you see Hashgacha Pratis, that's something that the Nefesh Bahamas could get excited about, because the Nefesh Bahamas could relate to it.
Rabbi Majeski, we're trying to get somebody to do a mitzvah by going through that nefesh Bahamas. Aren't you then disregarding the importance of Hasidus if you can't explain it in a way that's also gonna activate and get their nefesh, they're gonna be so excited, then aren't you disregarding the importance?
No, this person's in a place right now where they can't relate to it. It's just like we ourselves, all of us, we grow up from childhood to adulthood. When we're children, the way to inspire us is also the same thing. You tell children, if you do this and this, they'll get ice cream, they'll get candies, they'll get a trip. Yeah, so you'll say that, but that's not the real reason. It's not the real reason, but at this age, they can't relate to this reason. By the way, this is in the Rambam. The Rambam writes how you slowly, gradually train a child to get excited. First, you talk to them about good food, and then you tell them things that are more refined than that. You tell them that if you study Torah, you'll be more respected and honored. And then you tell them about Olam Haba, and you tell them about reward. It's a gradual process. At the first stage, I can't relate to anything else except for that. And again, we believe, according to Torah, that even if I tell this Jewish person all the gashmatik reasons, fix the mezuzah so someone in the house who's sick will become well, even that, the fact that they do it is still nefesh elokis. because it must be based on their belief that a mezuzah could have an effect on my health. But nevertheless, when the motivation is that this will bring me Hashem's bracha in health, it's something that Shabbos could relate to. Okay, so we continue Leonardo tomorrow.